everyone. I will be going over today how to make a leather Dussack based on the patterns found on the Company of St. Jude website. These are great patterns and they include instructions that you can follow along with. I will include the link below. And they also include this fantastic pattern that can be easily printed out. It uses 3 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and then you tape them together and you get this gem of a pattern. It is for your information for like the kind of leather that you would need to buy. It should at least be 8.5 inches wide, because that's how wide the pattern is, and 27 inches long. I am using sort of a bigger side because I'm going to be testing out various different versions and various different ways to cut this out. But at minimum, you would need really you would want something slightly bigger. So maybe like a 9 by 28 piece of leather at minimum for this particular pattern. So yeah, it's going to be exciting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it out on the leather and show you the process of cutting it up. All right, so here I'm choosing to use sort of this tail end of this side because there is sort of this odd little waist piece, and I think we all know that the first piece we cut from anything, the first thing we try to do in general is always going to be the weird looking one, or the one we're going to mess up on the most on a new endeavor. So I'm choosing to use this odd piece that just perfectly fits this pattern to start out with. So I am outlining and tracing this out using this ink pen, and I'm using it on the kind of wrong, quote unquote, wrong side. If you look at this hide, there's a smooth side and a more rough side. And I'm going to have the smooth side be out. The outside, when I sew this together into the Dussack, that it will finally become. And so I'm not really worried about this pen mark. It's going to go away. And honestly, even if you were to mark it on the outside, you could skive that off pretty easily. Skiving being a leatherworking term for like shaving something off. I have also used Sharpie before, and I will say that's mostly because I am not a perfectionist, because I will say that Sharpie ink will penetrate into the leather a little bit. So unless you don't want to do it like almost as if it were a dye, you can even, I've had friends who were on the brokish side use Sharpie to apply a superficial black dye to leather. So if you are a perfectionist, definitely don't use Sharpie. I have before, I'm not gonna lie. And then if you are a super perfectionist and you are very concerned about any sort of residual outlining marks, what you could do, and what you very well could do, is use something like a chalk outline, or even if you were to take some sort of edge of something and mark it, leather will hold memory. It will remember scratches for a little bit, so you can just follow those scratches. I am not a perfectionist, and this is my first one, and I know it'll look the weirdest, so I'm not super worried about it. I figure it'll work out. Now you'll see there's a little imperfection there that I'm just going to kind of cut along, and then I'm quite sure I'll be able to allow for it in the finishing process. There is a big cut here in the skin. This is kind of a cheaper skin with minor imperfections, and that's why I got it for a good price. So to me, it's more important to avoid that violation that's cutting into the leather than it is to have a slightly cosmetically imperfect side, because this is going to be a weapon that theoretically we'll be using to do historical fencing. So to me, it's more important that this maintain its integrity, not have any weak points and not having any tearing, because there will be, you know, leather is pretty soft and forgiving, but we are going to have a rigid core of some kind in all the Dussacks I'm going to be making. So what I am using to cut, and I'm also going to use different things to cut these out, just so you guys can see and adapt based on what you have. These, this is 10 to 12 ounce leather. That's what the company of St. Jude recommends. It can be as light as 9, they said, and you can go up to 14, but they don't recommend that. It's a bit too heavy. And I've worked with like 14 ounce leather once, and it was awful. It's so thick. So I don't recommend that. This will be like sturdy, but not flimsy. So what my preferred thing to use, very rusty, because I am not the best maintainer of tools, but this is a tin snip, and it is great for cutting all sorts of things. It's intended to cut like metal, sort of thin metal sheets. Not something like a Beverly shear. That's what you want for some more substantial metal. But in my opinion, it is fantastic for cutting these thick bends of leather. And you just kind of work along. And if I were a perfectionist, which I will reiterate probably umpteen times in this video, I'm not, I would probably be doing this much slower. And I have, yeah, he's always here to help. He's always very invested in any kind of project. This is Nibbles. He's very important to the study of historical fencing. And you'll notice that I didn't have to cut this, even though it's like cosmetically wonky. Anytime you're outlining something and you can like lay it along a reasonably straight side so that you don't have to cut everything out, that is the way to go, guys. So the only thing that is a little awkward about these tin snips is you can buy handedness tin snips. And by that, I mean, you can buy a right-handed tin snip that is ideal for cutting curves to the right side. There's like the left-handed side that ideal for cutting curves to the left. And then this is a straight tin snip, which is really great at straight cuts and can do left or right-handed cuts, but they're not great at it. So you'll see this is going to be a little awkward as I navigate the curve. And the difference in these kinds of tin snips is, maybe I can, the blades are curved in such a way as to facilitate the particular types of cuts. Now the other method that you can use to cut leather is with, you could use just a very sharp knife, box cutter kinds of things, razor blades. These are really commonly used to cut leather goods. But I prefer the tin snip for this kind of stuff, particularly because the razor blades, sometimes you have to do an initial score, and then you have to score again, and then you have to score again, and sort of work your way kind of through these, especially with leather this thick, work your way down through like several layers of scoring. And with these snips, you don't have to do that. And the other thing about having to cut in the method that I've described with the scoring is you have to place something down, because if I would be cutting into my carpet if I were using the razor blade method. And it can get, they do want to twist in your hands a little bit, so it can be a little awkward to get yourself going initially. But then once you do, it usually proceeds, and then, you know, corners are always a little awkward to negotiate. Is nip it off. So now I already have Vanna wipe this here. I already have most of it cut out, and I just need to finish this. I think I want to work from this side now. And here I'm neatening up the edges, but if you wanted, again, to be a perfectionist, this kind of stuff, I would not neaten up the edges with this. I would shave it off with a very sharp knife or perhaps a razor blade, because those are really more effective for getting a really clean edge. All right, so here you have it. And then this will, it's very stiff and doesn't want to do this right this second. But we'll be putting a core in and then folding this over like this. And then it'll be a little training sword made out of this substantial leather. So as you can see, it's a little messy along the edges, but that's easily fixed, Ta-da! Now, I will say the pattern has these holes, which I probably should have traced out to begin with, but I'll just cut them out and then trace them. And these holes, I mean, you kind of, with the tin snips, you want a point of place to start from. It's really hard to like cut into something like this with the snips. So what I will probably do is actually use a knife or razor blade to cut these out. All right, so the handle guard holes have been traced out, and I will be cutting them out with a razor blade. This is a pretty small cutting board. So I'm going to orient it this way just to make sure all the angles are covered. And if you'll see, don't know if it's very clear, but it's a pretty light score there. So I'm gonna go over it again. And again, you see I'm further in now. Here you see I've gone off a little off to the side. You want to avoid that. So you don't want to mar what you're trying to do here. And that's almost all the way through. Sometimes when you do that, you can part the leather a little bit. But you see, I still haven't made it all the way through. Try and get a little more length out of the blade. Yep. Usually it'll sound a little different once you've made it all the way through. So look. So if you can see, this is pretty thick, pretty substantial leather. Hey guys, so we, as you saw, cut out the straight edges with the utility blade, but I was really struggling to get these corners, so I'm going to show you how I did that. So now that we have kind of this access, it is relatively simple to cut through with the tin snip. So now we have these tabs, and now we have the working room, me and Nibbles here, the working room to now work around this curve using the tip of the tin snips. Ta-da! All right, so as demonstrated earlier, this is very stiff. So what I will be doing is soaking this in water and then clamping it to pre-form that shape prior to gluing it up. So what I'm doing now is I am cutting out from some scrap leather from the previous large Dussack. I am cutting out a thrusting tip. Now, I don't believe a thrusting tip is strictly necessary. I'm sure you can use it just fine the way it is. There is some flex and bend, but I think it would look nice and also give a little bit of extra flexibility. And also in the Meyer technique, there is a certain amount of, cutting with the back tip. And so that will give a nice visual reference for what you should be aiming to cut with those particular techniques. So I have sketched out roughly a sort of tabbed pattern from a scrap piece of paper that I am now going to take and I'm going to trace with this pencil. Voila. And voila. So here, I found my good Stanley Fat Max tin snips, and these actually have, let's see if I can get a better view. These actually have the directional indicators on them so that you can see what direction these will actually cut in. So I've been pretty crude with this inner tab. I'm not really worried about how it's gonna end up looking because it won't be visible, but I am going to neaten out this outer edge here. And there we go. I am pretty happy with that. So that will end up getting glued in along with the PEX core. And then once that glue has set, then it will get sewed together along with the outside and inside handle binding. Ta-da! Okay, so I just wanted to film this to explain a part of the process that I neglected to film, which was after you cut out the pattern for the Dussack in leather, you do need to soak it in water to soften it so that it's easier to glue together during the glue together process, because it is pretty stiff and doesn't really want to bend. But once you soak it, easy peasy. So you can soak it in a bucket of water. I did it in my bathtub using warm water for about a minute, because I feel like warm water softens it a little more rapidly. But you just need to soak it in there until it easily bends into that Dussack shape. And then what I did was I put a towel over it, one, to kind of soak up some of the excess water, and then two, so that the clamps wouldn't mark it when it's wet, and clamped it and let it dry overnight. Now, overnight, that's all you really need to do. But another part, kind of extra thing that I did was, after overnight, it was still slightly damp, and so I took some leatherworking tools and I stamped some patterns or designs into it. So slightly damp leather. This is called tooling, and it's a whole nother process, and there's lots of instructional videos that you can watch online for tooling, if that's something you're interested in doing during this particular step. But all I'm here to say is that is a good time to tool if you do know or are interested in trying out or messing around with leather tooling, because that soaking step is, a step that is also common to leather decoration. So it makes it really easy to stamp patterns in there and designs that will hold their shape after the leather is dry. So yeah, that's that part. Now, I'm going to lay it. See if you can get a good view. The way I'm laying it is the blade ratchets down. It's ratcheted down right next to my thumb. And then it just pushes on through. Super easy, super clean way to cut PEX or any other sort of pipe. I highly recommend. This is the Husky with the quick release. So all I have to do is open it, opens right back up, and then I can start ratcheting closed again. I'm going to cut 2 of these because I've got 2 Dussacks. And to eyeball it, I'm just going to, actually I'll use the yardstick again for precision's sake. All right, thumb at the 24-inch mark. Once again, I'm going to lay it down here and slowly creep up on my pipe until, once again, I have the blade right next to my thumb. And then once it bites in, I let go. 1, 2, 3 squeezes. I have a little bit of excess PEX. Don't care. This is fine. PEX pipe is really cheap. I think that whole length of pipe cost me $2. So now that I have the PEX pipe, I am going to glue it in for you. So as I showed on an earlier step, we've kind of marked where the PEX pipe is going to go. And then I also have this, this little thrusting tip that I've made. And so what we're going to do is we are going to paint with this liquid solvent all area. And I'm going to take off my jacket just because I don't want to get any of this contact cement on my super swank jacket. Probably open the can here, and then I'm going to use a sacrificial brush because you can get these are called chip brushes. They're very inexpensive at Home Depot. And generally with stuff like this, once you've used a brush on it and that it dries, to me it's not worth it cleaning this off a brush. I'm not even sure if you could. And so this is sort of meant to be disposable. But I like the hairs on it a little nicer than I like the foam. So, as you can see, I have, for the most part, a little imperfectly there, right there. But I have, for the most part, successfully avoided that main center spine area. And I'm just gonna hit it a little in the places where I missed. I got a little bare patch there. I got a little bare patch there. And then also I'm going to hit this tongue. And then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert this here. I like the way that looks. And then well, I think that was already kind of there. Yeah. I'm going to press it down pretty firmly using my body weight. Maybe you can see how my little designs turned out. Not amazing, not like a professional casing job, but since the leather was wet anyway, why not stamp a little pattern in it? It's also fine to not stamp a little pattern in it if you're like, oh, effort. All right, so it's already holding together, tacky, and then it'll cure, but just for insurance, and I should have grabbed it a little ahead of time, I'm going to use some of these handy dandy clamps I have. And because the leather is not wet, I'm not super worried, TBH, about this marking. But if you are, these clamps like this, they can go like this, which is great for clamping something that maybe is curved or a little regular, but it will put pressure on a smaller point. So I like to use the broad side. A-okay, so I'm going to leave that to dry overnight, and then we will pick up with the next step. All right, so now I'm going to show how I finally clamped everything. It's been drying overnight, and now I'm at the stage. It was handy that it was able to just stand up like this, as if arranged for display. So now I'm going to remove all the clamps, placing them in my little clamp bucket, and then mark and drill the holes for sewing. So here we see, you could probably, if you were not wanting to spar with something like this, it would probably be okay just to put the PEX pipe in and just use it as a weapon for forms and drills, but it is a little floppy. The PEX pipe will fix that, but the stitches are really nice and necessary to ensure the durability. This little marker on my level is probably better suited. So this is 1 centimeter, and it is slightly larger than 1/4 of an inch and slightly smaller than 1/2 inch. So that's the range I think that's good for stitch length. I'm going to do 1/2 inch. I think that'll be sufficient. If you want it to be a little more secure, and have maybe like a neater look to the stitching, then a centimeter or 1/4 of an inch would be fine. I think that 1/4 of an inch honestly is a little bit of overkill in terms of stitch spacing. What I'm going to do, and you can do this with a pen as well, I'm just going to make little marks in the leather with a leather needle to show me where I want to be placing my stitches. So this is roughly straight. There's a little bit of an unevenness along the edge of the leather, but what I'm going to eyeball it to try and get it like about 1/4 to 1/2 inch away from the edge of the leather, and then I'm going to mark every 1/2 inch. This is working, but I'm having a little bit of trouble getting a good grip on the needle because it's very small. So I'm actually going to take a drill bit, just because I have it here and I don't want to hunt for my awl. It's got a little bit of a pointed tip and it's larger, so it's a little less fatiguing to grip. Yeah, that's better, and it also makes a deeper mark, which I like. You don't really have to worry about marring the leather with the deeper mark because you're going to be drilling straight through this. I prefer a drill for this thickness of leather. You can use an awl, you can use a rotary punch, or you can use a hammer punch where the punch looks like a chisel and it's got a hole in it, and then you hammer on it to cut a hole in the leather. Those all work, but this is much faster. And once the actual item is stitched, I have not really noticed much of a difference in the appearance or cleanness of the hole and the stitches. Ruler, because this is slightly curved, so it's at a bit different angle. So I want to maintain that the same sort of distance from the edge while also aligning with my last dot. And then once again, going every ½ inch. Once again, the angle changes. And you can see I have this pattern, so I am trying to not completely violate the pattern, although it's a little irregular. And again, changing angles because we're rounding a corner. And then to go back and finish, this is going to be my corner. And as I turn the corner, following the angle, this one, and because the tip is going to be under a little more strain than the other parts, I am going to narrow it to a 1/4 inch. Now for the drill bit, I'm going to be using a 3 32 inch drill bit. And this is not so small that the leather needle, which is just, I use the standard straight economy pack leather sewing needles that you can get at Tandy. It's not so thick that, or not so small or narrow that the leather needle is going to struggle going through, but it's not so big that it will produce loose, large, over large, messy looking holes. I do have, this is not directly on my work surface, or this is not directly my work surface. I do have a scrap piece of plywood here because you are likely to drill through just ever so slightly the leather into your work surface. And so it's always a good idea to have some kind of backing here. And one thing that would speed up this process too is if you had a surface that you could clamp to comfortably. This would make the process much faster. Otherwise, you're going to need to press it down and hold. To speed up my work process, so I'm going to clamp this here, and I am going to clamp all right, so this is a little bit of a better angle on it. You can't see the holes because they're the same color as the leather because I haven't used a pen, but I can see the holes easily and clearly, and so I am able to line up with the holes. And easily drill and then pull out. but I'm gonna see if I can show you. If you see right here, here is the error that I made right here in placement. These holes on this side are much neater looking. The exit holes are generally are for this sort of thing. But once it's sewn together, it really won't matter at all. You won't be able to tell with the thread in place. So I'm going to do the same thing around this inner edging. And then I will show you how to sew it together. Hello everyone and welcome to my kitchen. Here, now that we have some better lighting than is in the basement, you can see here are all the holes that I have drilled for the stitching. And here is the opening, the little pocket we've created with the unglued space to insert our handy dandy length of PEX tubing to provide a spine and some rigidity and support for our Dussack. However, this will be a very tight fit, and therefore I'm going to let the water run until it's a bit warm. We're going to need to wet this in order to make the leather flexible enough to fit. We're going to run that inside. What I do is I do like to have the tip, because if you are gluing on this extra tip, this is not going to be completely sealed like it might be if you didn't use the tip and you just completely glued it down without any intervening piece. So there will be water that drips, and I want it to drip in my sink. And then to get the good angle that I want for this, so just because my faucet is down here, I'm going to use this to run some water directly into the Dussack. You can do it a trickle if you think that would be better. I don't have to soak the whole Dussack in order to get this to work. But you've got the spine wet. And now I'm going to try and insert this PEX tubing. It's going in very easily now. And if you do have trouble getting it further in, let that drip off a little bit. If you do have trouble getting it further in, so I'm clamping this between my legs, and I have my handy dandy rubber mallet. And with the aid of the rubber mallet, you can see that I've gotten it the rest of the way in. But we still have a little ways to go, because the problem is we have these stitching holes, and right now this tube is past the stitching holes, so we're not going to be able to stitch this closed over it the way it is now. But if I continue to pound on the end here, it's not going to be super effective, because it's now even with the leather, and I'm going to deform the leather. But I got a, let's see, 1/2 inch by 5 foot long piece of PEX pipe, which means that if you have two 24-inch 2 foot lengths, you're going to have 1 foot left over. And this is the perfect length to then place over the edge of the PEX tube, and then use the impact from hitting on that piece to drive it the rest of the way in. How far is too far? I'm glad you asked. So you want to for sure get it past, the stitches. And as long as you've got it sufficiently past, you want to stop. Because you don't want this to go all the way through and split the edges of your tip. Now this has been glued with contact cement, but with sufficient force you could rip that back apart, especially as contact cement, I think it usually takes 7 days for it to completely 100 million% completely cure. So this is still not the most cured it could be. So here's a good stopping point. You want to be about 2 inches, which my thumb is about 2 inches, so that's a good ratio. 2 inches from the end here. And as you can see, I can pinch it closed over it, and I'll be able to sew past. And it's probably, I would say, maybe a 1/2 inch in there. So now I will be able to sew this closed, let it dry completely, and have a complete finished Dussack. All right, now we have come to the portion of the project where I will be stitching this closed. So all you need for this is I have used some wax thread, leather sewing thread from Tandy. You could get it from other places, but that's a standard place to get it. And then just one of the standard, just regular economy packs of the straight sewing needle. And then I always try to give myself a large amount of thread because I don't, knots are messy. And I want there to be as few visible knots as possible. So if I would rather have excess thread at the end of the project than have to like knot 2 or 3 times. Your mileage may vary. Other people may prefer differently. And the nice thing about these leather needles is it's pretty easy just to stick straight through the needle. Because this is wax, you may have some wax buildup on the eye, and I just wipe it off. So we go all the way to the end here. You can tie a simple knot like this, or the trick where you loop over your finger and then roll does work, though it's a little tackier. So I just like rolled this loop, and then I'm going to pull it down. And usually if you manage it right, you can like go over your second knot, get an extra thick knot. And now, because I have a huge bunch of excess, I'm going to try and kind of get it more even so that I'm not spending all my time pulling through the knot. Now you can see there's like a bunch of like wax on there now, and you just pull it off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a double running stitch, and that is a very simple stitch in which I will keep going in one direction and then come back and go back over. And the way I like to start with these Dussacks is I like to start at the open end where the PEX pipe has been inserted because that knot that you've created at the end can be tucked in and away. You may have to wiggle a little bit because this is not going to be quite as straightforward as the other already glued together parts. But, so you see it's pulled through and then I tuck in. Oop. All right, so it's all tucked in. And then I just go straight down. And then you want to look on the other side and you want not this first one, but the second one because we're doing a running stitch. If you've used the same bit that I recommended, just go straight through. And you want to pull it tight, but it's probably not going to hold until you do your next stitch. So your next stitch, this was our first stitch. Next stitch, you just go the next one over. It's really simple and straightforward. And now when you pull it to, the wax on the thread helps a lot. You are going to get a little bit more closure. All right, so there's the stitch on this side, there's the stitch we created, and then you just go the next hole over. It is idiot proof. And at this point, we have enough stitches. You've got there, 2 there, 1 there. I do like to really pull on the thread at this point to start closing it up. And that will actually hold now that we have a few stitches in there. And you can see it's already starting to close up pretty well. It won't close up completely until we go back through and do the other stitches. And again, here we are. And we just do the next stitch. All right, and then something I want to point out is you now have gaps here between the stitches. And I suppose you could just leave those gaps and you would just have a straight running stitch. But what we're going to do is we're going to sew in this fashion all the way to the end. And I'll show you what that looks like. And then you're going to sew back around and fill in every other stitch, creating the double running stitch. This is also how, if you do any embroidery, this is how black work works. You can also do it with a back stitch, but you'll create one side that is messy looking. And you don't really want that for a project like this where both sides are going to be visible and used. And you see we're starting to get to the end of that doubled up thread. And then you shift the needle down to account for it. So it shifted down and now we have plenty of this excess thread. All right, so it's pretty much that ad nauseum till I get to the end. So I'm just gonna go ahead and proceed to the end of this and then show you coming back around. All right, so we have reached, as you can see, the end of the running stitch here, and now I have my needle through that very last hole. Caught the string on my drinking cup. And so, just like before, you're just pushing it in through the next hole over. But this time, there is already some thread in there. And because there is already some thread in there, it may be a little more difficult to push the needle through. This is a piece of leather that you can see my dog also interacted with a little bit and found enjoyable. But this is the scrap piece of leather that I use to push it through. You can also use a thimble. And then sometimes I will take a pair of pliers to pull it through. So I usually take a pair of needle nose pliers to pull it through if I'm having difficulty. I don't necessarily need it for every one. And I try not to use a whole lot of force because the tandy needles can bend and break if you're too rough with them. Also, as I'm sort of rounding the corner and finalizing the back stitch, I like to make sure to pull these stitches tight. And I do find the stitches near the tip tend to be the most difficult to pull through, and I think that's because not only are you working with the doubled up thread, but also you are moving through 3 layers of leather instead of 2. Yeah, so that one I didn't even have to use the pliers for. And this one went straight through without the leather. So now, as you can see, on both sides, you have a complete stitch instead of this single layer. And if you were really lazy, you could probably get away with the single layer, but I like the double running stitch. That's security. So I will say just a couple, I'm going to continue on and finish it out. And I don't think there's any big need to show most of it, but just a couple of comments I will make. Looking here, when you insert the PEX pipe, even if this part has been glued together, and it should be glued together along here, it's a pretty narrow area of contact, so it will pull away sometimes. And I'm just here to say, don't worry about that, because the stitching, you can just be diligent about pulling your stitches tight on this section, and it shouldn't be anything you really have to worry about. And also, when you were finishing off your stitches here, these last 2-3 stitches, be very sure to pull them tight. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want to close over that core. So this stitch I've gone back over, gotten very close to completely closing, and I'm going to go back into that last one. Really yank on it. And there you see it has closed. So now at this point, the way I like to tie it off is I like to go, here it comes out here, I'd like to go back under the stitches, pull through. This creates a loop, go back through that loop and tie that knot. And then I usually will do that one more time for insurance. All right, so now that I have done that, I have my knots, but just to kind of try and give it a little bit more of a clean look, I then take this trailing end, push it through one more time. And because this has gone through so many times, I'm going to use my pliers to finish pulling it through. So now it's coming out here. Note, it's actually secured back here. The knots are back here. But I have pulled it through. Now I'm going to cut it here. Right there. And then you can really like flatten it down kind of into the other threads because of the wax. It makes it want to hold together. And there we have your completed, mostly sewn bit. And then with this section, it's much the same. I have enough excess thread that I'm just going to use the same thread. And the main difference with this here is that you're not going to be able to really hide the knot so much because you don't really have access to the interior to tuck it in. So this is a double knot, and then I'm going to tie it one more time to make sure this is a big, chunky, secure knot that is bulky and will want to resist pulling through. And I'm going to start here, kind of on the inner edge. I'm going to pull through. And then I'm still using the same back stitch technique. But what I'm going to do here, just for the first initial one, just to make sure that even if the knot does pull through, that it's kind of looped back onto itself. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to give you an amazing shot of this. But even with something where you haven't double threaded, you can part with your needle and actually sew into the threads that make up your thread, the individual stringy threads of your thread. This is something you see a lot in embroidery too, as a technique for securing things. And what I usually will do is, you're always going to have a little bit of excess thread, but I'm just going to trim most of it off. So I've got a little bit, a tuffet, if you will, of excess thread, but not too much. And then I just continue going with the backstitch technique all the way around. The nice thing is, I think if your stitches are staggered right, you can theoretically, instead of reversing as we did here. You could just keep going around filling in those empty spots, or you can reverse. Either is perfectly acceptable. And you just finish off in the same way you finished off that last stitch for the main portion of the Dussack. And I will say, rather than like flipping this over and around, I often will sew it holding it upright and going back and forth. Just seems easier to me to do it that way. And I'm going to go back around. And as a note, I do make more of a point to really pull tight here along this section of the handle, because it's going to be under a little more strain and pressure from the PEX tubing than the other portion of the handle. And once you pull it, the wax on the string really helps to keep it closed. All right, so that is pretty much, and I'll just keep continuing this around until it is finished. And it'll look pretty much like this, with the exception of just the little tied off portion that'll be right there. All right, so that is how you make a handmade leather training Dussack.